Imagine a world where you knew that you mattered and you belonged. The people cared about you because we were so darn good at listening to one another, no matter how different we are. That is what Sidewalk Talk is doing by putting listeners on sidewalks all over the world so that we can practice the art of connecting. Join me, founder and director Traci Ruble, as I interview experts on the fine art of human connection and interview some of our volunteers who've been listening on the sidewalk and even some of the folks that we've listened to. And if you want to volunteer, consider joining us at sidewalk-talk.org. Minna Salami and I had this conversation almost a year ago when her book first came out, called Sensuous Knowledge, a Black Feminist Approach for Everyone. And this conversation is deep, rich, and I kind of just allowed my own unconscious to follow her in the most curious and wonderful conversation that takes us from languages to culture to what inclusion really means. And boy, if there were a book that I would encourage you to invest in, especially if Black feminism is important to you, there are some ways that she'll get you to think outside the box and re-own something in yourself that ultimately will help us all connect better. Minna Salami. Can't wait for you to meet her. So, Minna Salami, I know that we've rescheduled this, and I just want you to know that that's par for the course for the Sidewalk Talk podcast. There's always this magic involved in these conversations. And so I'm actually glad that we've had to reschedule a few times because I'm trusting the magic of our conversation, especially after digging into your book, Sensuous Knowledge, which, by the way, I want a little props because I've sold many copies of your book. I love it. But I want to kind of locate you a little bit. And first of all, I'm going to locate you in a really funny way. Would you be willing to tell me all the languages that you speak?
Of course. But I first want to say thank you so much for having me on this podcast. It truly feels like an honor to be speaking with you. And it also does feel like some kind of serendipity after the many reschedulings, since which you've been on holiday and I have to, and hopefully we'll bring some of that kind of invigorated spirit into the conversation. Languages that I speak. I speak English, although I tend to think of myself as not fully as a fluent English speaker. And that is because I speak these other languages, which are Swedish, Finnish fluently, and then I used to speak Spanish pretty much fluently, but I've forgotten most of it now. And I speak German as well at a conversational level. And I spoke English until I was a teenager, living in Lagos in Nigeria. And then I moved to Sweden when I was 13 years old. And of course, I still had English around me, TV and friends who lived abroad and things like that. But English became a sort of receding language for me for over a decade when I only spoke Swedish. So a lot of the things that you learn, the kind of vocabulary that emerges during your coming of age, if you like, when you start to deepen your knowledge for different people, it's different things. But I noticed that my English, I lose vocabulary when it comes to things like idioms or nature and animals. I find it easier to go to Swedish for those kinds of things. So yeah, a very long answer to a simple question, but I speak those 5 languages. It might be interesting to say that to share a little bit about why I speak the other languages.
Yeah.
So I speak Finnish because my mother was Finnish, and she always spoke Finnish to me. but I've never lived in Finland. So as I just described, I lived in Sweden for over a decade. But Finnish is kind of my very first language that I was spoken to as a baby already. So that will always stay with me, as will Swedish. But Spanish, I started studying in high school, and then I moved to Spain for a year to really cement it. And German, I speak I will emphasize a conversational level, because my parents met in Germany, in Hamburg, where they were students, and they always spoke German to each other and to me. So our kind of breakfast table would consist of my parents speaking in German to themselves and to me, and I would reply intermittently in English, or if I was only replying to my mom, I would reply in Finnish. So so German is also a language that I have it in my bones, but I've never lived in Germany or sort of had to really use it on a conversational or in speech or writing or anything like that.
I'm so glad I asked this question. That was just a fun way to sort of help people understand that you're bringing this very different lens. And that was more than I even imagined. It was amazing. I want to just talk about predating your book. You really are somebody that brings this very unique lens, because you have such a widened embrace to so many different ways of seeing the world from so many different lands. And you speak about Black feminism with this different lens and started writing a blog about it. How do you think that this way of moving around the world, all these different language exposures, has shaped the way that you think of Black feminism?
Thank you. That's such a great question, as was the previous one. I'm already really feeling this podcast. And how has that shaped? How has my multiple experiences or multiple perspectives in life shaped my Black feminism? I guess one of the things that has defined my life is this sense of not fitting in. And this is true for very many people, but I guess for me, the sense of not fitting in was always connected to the kind of multiple backgrounds that I embody. So being of mixed ethnicity, Finnish and Nigerian, and then growing up in different parts of the world. From Sweden, I moved to Spain, and then from Spain to New York, where I lived for 3 years, and then I moved to London, where I still am. And I've been kind of, before the pandemic, I was splitting my time between Lagos and London. There was the question of multiple languages, and then also I grew up in an interfaith household. I lived on a family compound as a child, which is a kind of a traditional Yoruba way of living. And my dad's Muslim, my mother was a Protestant. I had aunties and cousins living in the house who were Catholic. And so there was always a sense that, that I wasn't 100% this, that, or the other. I've never been, I wasn't a devoted Christian or Muslim, or I wasn't 100% of Yoruba ethnicity or Finnish ethnicity. And the languages that I spoke sort of intermingled in my psyche and in my soul and mind. And so I share all this because I feel like this is connected to Black feminism in the sense that when I first encountered Black feminist work, what I felt really viscerally and powerfully was a sense that I fit in. I felt that this was a world in which, I guess, my multiplicity and then my experiences, of course, as a woman and as a person of color and all of that, there was space for that. But of course, as you allude to, I come to Black feminism with my own unique perspective, and so I guess Black feminism almost it's something that I'm in this reciprocal relationship with, which is it's a very complex relationship. It's I don't want to imply that it's straightforward, because that has to do with the way that Blackness has come to be understood in the world, and that is also something that's continually in flux. But in this present moment, and this is perhaps more true to what it was perceived as when I first encountered Black feminism, but Blackness right now is very much tied to the African American experience and the kind of definitions of Blackness as African Americans have formulated them, and the way that Blackness would be formulated in a kind of diasporic sensibility outside of America and in the African continent certainly overlaps and is connected. They would be, contexts, sort of dialectic contexts that are siblings. But there are also differences. And so with a subtitle, for instance, in my book, Sensuous Knowledge, and the subtitle being A Black Feminist Approach for Everyone, I think quite often when people see that subtitle, there's in some sense a predefined assumption of what that might mean. And what that assumption entails is quite often the way that Blackness and Black feminism, even to be more specific, has been defined in an American context. And I come from that context. In many ways, my book is a kind of, it's a love letter to African American feminists who have, they have, as I said, it was it was so many African American thinkers in whose work I found that sense of fitting in, and I found a home, not exclusively, but a great deal. The Toni Morrisons and Angela Davises and bell hooks, and and I cite these thinkers thoroughly through the book because, or not because, it just it is in that sense of kind of my way of paying honor to that tradition. But I'm also coming with all these multiple perspectives. I'm also kind of I don't want to use the word challenging, it's not quite the right word, but there's also, or I'll just use it. I'm also kind of challenging that would be, that kind of origin of Black feminism would be the only one, or even the main one. And so somebody like me, who's Scandinavian, African, and all of the other multiple identities that I have traversed through life as, is also a shaper of this thing that we call Black feminism.
So this may be an incredibly capitalist way to couch this question. I'm sort of checking myself a little bit. I'm like, Traci, why are you asking that question? First, I hear the love letter. When I read your book, I hear the love letter. I almost feel that you help folks reading your book also fall in love with Black feminism, because you help us understand, I'm going to say a really woo word, but spiritually, what Black feminism has to offer all of us, if we could actually see beyond the headlines of the day, right? And as you've said in other interviews, not center whiteness as you're talking about Black feminism, but center Black feminism as you're talking about Black feminism. So it almost, to me, as I was reading it, it felt like a guidepost for my own heart's expansion, in a way, of things that whiteness maybe has limited in me. And while I don't have the same, I'm finding a really strange phenomena. For me, I'm finding a lot of solace in some trans thinkers. I'm super into the trans movement. So my outsiderness has been quenched by thinkers in the trans community, similar to how your outsiderness was quenched by your heroes in African American feminism. But the question that I have for you is, what do you hope your impact is? You started this blog, MsAfropolitan, and were you writing that for you? Or were you writing that to challenge or something else?
Both and something else. So I was writing it for me, insofar as writing is a way to understand things for me. I think, more than anything, when I sit down to write or stand up to write, or, do whatever to write, I, I think the closest kind of analogy to how I feel when I'm writing is a bit like an archaeologist might feel when they're trying to find some very specific object, and they have to, sort of excavate everything that's in the way and remove obstacles in order to gain the kind of clarity of how they might find their object. And for me, that object would be some kind of truth. And so I have to, I'm kind of trying to get to some kind of truth, and in the process I'm excavating the patriarchal conditioning within myself and in outside society, and so on. And so in that sense, I think I was always driven to write and to write my blog, as you're asking about specifically, with the sense that, with some kind of sense of growth on a personal scale. But I guess recognizing that process of growth, which I increasingly do, and I don't know if I intentionally set out to do this, but like a personal process of growth is, of course, completely tied to a collective process of growth. And many of the issues that I have grappled with in my writing and on my blog are, of course, by nature of us living in a shared ecology, in which we are conditioned according to ultimately quite arbitrary sort of labels and identities. But nevertheless, that means that the issues that I was grappling with are issues that people, especially people like me, but also, many others are grappling with. And I'm very much motivated to the kind of collective exploration. So I wouldn't say that I was writing my blogs for others in that sense of like, this is what others might want to read about, but rather in the sense of, I would like to have a conversation with others about things that I suspect they too are experiencing, because I am experiencing them, and they're weighing on me, or they are giving me a sense of hope, or whatever it might be. And then I also started the blog out of frustration and rage, maybe even, because of the state of exclusion that Black women face, especially in the ideas world, which is a world that I very much see myself as contributing to, as well as the kind of feminist theory and feminist activism world. And I don't mean to imply that these worlds are not always like overlapping, but there is also in the culture kind of a bit of a distinct kind of ideas world. And Black women's voices are still, even though it's better these days, but they're still really marginalized. And so I started the blog also with that sense of frustration about that. And it was a very interesting time compared to now, because I started the MsAfropolitan in 2010, and the blogs were still relatively new at the time. They were very organic. Like, I didn't spend time I didn't have a marketing plan or a marketing goal for the blog. It was just, I discovered the technology, and I was instantly drawn to voicing my opinions in that space. And then I was also aware that I'd been writing other blogs for about 3 years at the time. So I did know what we call the blogosphere quite well. And I knew that the blogosphere was when it came to feminism, it was, most feminist bloggers were white. And when it came to Pan-Africanism and African studies, most bloggers were male. And so I think intuitively, I felt a need. I sensed that there was a need for voices in the blogosphere that kind of were intersectional, which is the word we'd use now, but didn't really have then.
So I'm having so many thoughts. I'm hearing this beautiful intention of growth that includes making room for your rage, but also making room for grappling. There's something in, as I read your writing, you kind of give us all permission to grapple rather than being spoon-fed what we should believe. It's almost like you're inviting us to learn to think for ourselves, but at least pointing out through your archaeological deep dives that when you're grappling, here's some of the voices that you haven't heard. Make sure that you include them. I mean, so maybe this is where we start talking about a little bit about your book or pieces of your book, but Minna, I'm not going to be able to fully digest just the idea that my entire conception of the word soul, I'm frankly still pissed off about it. Everything that I've known about soulfulness has been learned from white men. And I don't know what to do with that right now. I don't think you necessarily give a prescription, but there's something about how you treat these topics that invite some discomfort and inner wrestling, to me anyway. Is that your intention, do you think? Or I don't know, what's it like to hear that?
Well, it's really flattering, or no, that's not even true. Flattering is not the word. It's very assuring and comforting. Flattering just sounds a bit forced, because what I really felt when you said that I'm inviting you to grapple, and hopefully other readers as well, that feels very assuring to me. And I kind of feel like at least, I've communicated what I'm working very hard to communicate to at least one reader, and that means a lot to me. Yeah, it's intentional, but it's intentional in a kind of, in a way as if, if you, let's see if I can make this analogy work. So if you were in a house, a beautiful house, let's say with windows, one set of windows facing east and the other west, and you looked out of one window and there was, this really enchanting world, and the sun was shining. There's a lot of beauty and a lot of entertainment and excitement. But then you walk to the other side of the house and look through the other window, and there was a blazing fire that seems to be approaching. And you kept sort of gravitating to the window through which you could view the excitement and the shining sun and the glamour or whatever. I kind of have that sense of being in that kind of abode, living in Europatriarchy. And I guess having that sense of being torn between the world as it is, as it manifests beautifully, and there's so much to be hopeful about and so much to still feel like we can reimagine and reinvent, and at the same time just seeing this fire coming at us. If that were you in that house, I would run to you and say, look at these different perspectives, but you have to do something about the fire. And it's that kind of feeling that I have when I'm writing about the topics that I write about. That I don't want the reader I want the window with the beauty and the amazement and the love and comfort and reassurance and all of that to be wide open. I don't want to quench that in the reader. But I also want to make them sort of strongly aware that they need to grapple, if you like, with the fire on the other side of the house.
So I'm just going to repeat that for everyone listening, that there's an invitation for us all to grapple with the fire, I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area, and when I was in grad school, this was what was this, 18 years ago, 19 years ago, you know, it was the height of the spiritual bypassing movement, where you just use pleasurable spirituality and positive vibes and meditating away all your problems to not wrestle with fire, but to avoid fire at all costs. I think there's still some of that going on, but some other voices have entered in to have us really learn that these spiritual tools are actually designed to help you stay in the fire, not avoid the fire.
Mhm.
Stay in listening to diverse perspectives, not silo into people that think and look and talk just like you. Which takes me in another, I want to talk a little bit about sensuous knowledge and first ask you, why did you write the book? Was it part of the same grappling, or was there some other call in you?
Yeah, it's definitely part of the same grappling and the same. I guess I've been speaking quite a bit about motivation and a drive that comes from within quite intuitively. I think that's quite often how my work comes to me. I don't deliberate on what I'm going to write about very much. So I deliberate a lot about on what I may be experiencing in any given moment, what is happening in the world. For instance, right now there's been this, and I'll get to the point, but I might go on a bit of a detour. At the moment, there's been this Met Gala, and Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez was there wearing a dress that said "Tax the Rich," and so that's, people are talking about that a lot, and so I've been deliberating on what do ideological and social movements, what is the relationship between those and the market forces and things like that, right? I'm not sort of driven to write anything about that right now, but probably, maybe months from now or something, it may pop up as a theme for me to write about intuitively. So I don't mean to say that I don't spend a lot of time like ruminating on the things that I eventually write about. It's just not typically a consecutive process. And so I can't really pinpoint when exactly or why exactly I decided to write Sensuous Knowledge. One of the moments that became clear to me was when I was writing it, in the chapter about liberation, the theme of that became Lauryn Hill's MTV Unplugged album, which came out in 2001. And I realized that, in a sense, I'd started writing Sensuous Knowledge already then. And that whole chapter ended up being about that album and my relationship, what that album sort of did to me and what it taught me about freedom. But the moment that I had that kind of intuitive instinct to write it was when I was in Silicon Valley, of all places, at the NASA.
Perfect.
Yes, of course, thinking of freedom and stuff like that. I was at the Singularity University to give a lecture, and the Singularity University is based in the NASA research camp in San Jose, and it was a really, I think it ties back a little bit to what you were saying about the spiritual bypassing and things like that, because it was a very, in many ways, nourishing environment for me. As I mentioned earlier, I'm working in the world of ideas, and I don't, because it's such a kind of cliquey world, and because when you work as a Black or woman anything, so as a Black feminist or a woman writer, you're instantly kind of even more, you're ostracized even more from other communities that you might also belong to. And so being in this very sort of deliberately ideas space was thrilling for me. And my brain cells were just so stimulated. People were just presenting all these big ideas for the future. And there was also a kind of spiritual side, which I've never been to Los Angeles, but I imagine like this was the closest I ever got to that kind of LA culture of, there was yoga in the mornings and all the food was vegan and healthy. And I've practiced yoga for very long. So in so many ways, this felt really, really wonderful space to be in for me. But then simultaneously, it was one of the most terrifying spaces to be in because, these are really the people who are shaping the future, and they had so many blind spots and so much what we might call unconscious bias, although I don't like to easily kind of or lazily maybe go to phrases like that because they can mean so many things to different people. But I can, to concretize, there was a specific conversation that I had that I found really jarring, which was with a group of people who were, they started talking about the insurance that they were getting and how it was insurance that was predicated upon them living until they were in their mid-hundreds. And I'd never really conceived this idea that, we might be able to surpass death until we're 150 years old or something, was like something people already are counting on. And, coming from the part of the world where, or a part of the world where the life expectancy is still sort of, in a person's 50s, this just was one of those moments that really hit home of how the set of people, however many humanistically informed ideas they come up with, are not going to be able to take us to that place that they themselves are proponents of in many ways, because of these blind spots and biases. And the next day after that conversation, I was swimming in the swimming pool at the NASA Research Center, and it was a lovely pool. I really enjoyed swimming there during my stay. And I was swimming, and this phrase, sensuous knowledge, appeared in my mind, and I knew instantly that it was the title of the book. And yeah, so I guess like I can't tell you the very many, the incidents or motivations that led up to that particular moment in which the book became an almost material object in my mind. But yeah, that was the intuitive moment that it all started.
As I listen to you, I can so now I'm thinking in images. I'm getting all kinds of pictures as I listen to you. I'm feeling a little sad too, ironically. There's this way in which I hear you saying there are these people with so much power and influence. And as you were digesting their blind spots, there's some real wisdom that came, which is how do we reclaim or come out of our blind spots? And it comes from the knowledge that we gain sensuously. And I love where you really took Audre Lorde's words and added to it in your book. You said, look, here's what the master's tools are not. And here's what we need to, and this is where maybe you are a little prescriptive, but in a great way, that we need to invite more eros into our life, more play, more poetry, borderlessness, dialogue, intuition. You talked about interbeing and harmony, and it needs to become a practice. And why I was picking on myself when I asked you the question, why did you write the book, is because that's a very Euro-patriarchal question. There's nothing about my question that's about sensuous knowledge, because what I heard you say is, I wrote the book from a place of deep interbeing. It came out of me from this connection to the land and to stories and to people and to poetry and to eros and to my rage and all the things that make one sensuous. And so it's very white of me to ask you, well, what's your motivation, Minna? What's the outcome? How much money are you going to make on this book?
Well, you didn't ask those latter questions, and the question you did ask did lead to I found it quite worthy to go back.
Well, I like to pick on myself because I like to demo to other white folks how to do that. So just a little side note.
Yeah.
But I do think there's this invitation that how we move from our unconscious bias is that we do have to begin to learn a different kind of knowledge. And we have to make it a regular practice where we're listening to more stories, the land, people from different viewpoints, our own bodies. I was really moved by that. I don't think I've mastered it. I suck at it, frankly, but I'm inspired.
It is such a difficult process, I think, to master. I mean, one of the things about writing this book, for me, like, it's been really life-changing, in the sense that I've kind of given myself a project, a way of seeing, that, of course, to some extent I was already at least attempting to embody, and I had some feeling of what it meant, but in articulating it in the book, and actually very much, like equally much almost, in the conversations that I've had after writing the book, such as this one, it's a kind of, for me as the author, I see it myself as a kind of lifelong project, or way of knowing, to have to carry with me and to develop. I think part of what what drove me to write the book, actually, going back to that question, which I don't think is altogether a bad question, to be honest, is wanting to think up or to conjure a way of knowing that is simultaneously utopian and pragmatic. There's a lot of radical ideas in the world, many of which I'm really inspired by and thankful for, but many that I also can feel are impracticable, and I sometimes approach more as poems or something, to kind of plant a seed of something, and I find that very useful. And my book is also that to some extent, but I also, I've always been drawn. I'm a pragmatist, as well as I don't call myself a poet, but my very first published work was a collection of poems. So there's some part of me that is drawn to the poetic.
I call you a philosopher. That's how I reference you.
Oh, well, that's flattering. There, I can use that word, certainly, flattering. Yeah, but that kind of, and actually, it also goes back a little bit to where you said that I was being descriptive to an extent in the book, which is, it's another way that I could talk about these kind of conflicting sides in me, to some extent conflicting, is that I have a very pedagogical approach and sensibility, which may have to do with the fact that my mother is a teacher, but I also have a side to me which just wants to be in the kind of the lyrical and the craft that writing is. And a third way that I sometimes half jokingly say is, it's the kind of Finnish and Nigerian in me. So Finns are it's a stereotype. We are typically introverted and, quite reclusive, and like to sort of withdraw from society a little bit, whereas Nigerians are the very opposite, stereotypically, very exuberant and boisterous, and bringing all of these sensibilities into one is kind of what informs, or what I might call, a kind of pragmatic utopian feeling that I wanted the book to convey. So yeah, like addressing, bringing a way to live, or knowing that it is urgent, to, like, going back to the house with the fire on one side, and recognizing the urgency of learning to communicate with each other, like to really talk, not just have panels or academic inter-exchange or whatever, but to really talk to each other, and knowing that we have to also really talk with the more than human world, and to just expand into our bodies, and yet that process has to also sort of have a bit of a light, maybe a light padding around, something that kind of grounds it in the political, in the psychosocial, and all of these worlds that I sometimes say that sensuous knowledge is kind of synthesizing the political and the aesthetic. The political being things like, aside from politics, obviously, but also the economy and technology and science and all of the things that we afford gravitas to, and then the aesthetic being the arts, poetry, eroticism, the body, and sort of fusing those two so that we can build a way of knowing, an episteme from in a way that actually is practicable, if not easily practicable. To your point of like it being a project that's not always simple, I was struggling very much with writing one of the chapters in the book. I was laboring, for months on end, and I just couldn't get it right. Actually, the first one on knowledge, and then I one day was doing yoga, and just as I was doing some stretch, this issue that had been really vexing with me was became somehow so lucid and clear. And I realized that, for all that time, I'd just been in my mind, in my brain, trying to find the solution. And I was trying to theorize a way of knowing that incorporates the body while completely being in my head. And it wasn't until I brought my body into the process.
That cracks me up.
I mean, so it's definitely a process.
Well, I know we're at the end of time. I could talk with you forever, long. I hope I get to meet you at another Emerge event at some point. But we have this tradition. It's sort of fitting that we just were talking about other ways of knowing and being embodied, because that's what we do when we listen on the sidewalk. I think marketing folks and fundraisers try to turn sidewalk talk into a bunch of people trying to go out and help other people. But actually, it's the people that are listening that are practicing a new way of being in the world. It's actually what the project is about. And so I get out of the way here at this point and I hand off the mic to you and say, hey, Minna, what would you want to say to the 8,000 folks that have sat on sidewalks around the world as part of Sidewalk Talk, either a wish or words of wisdom as our ritual for how we end our conversation?
Thank you, Traci. I could also carry on this conversation for much longer. And thank you for the chance to offer something to people listening on the sidewalks. I'm completely unprepared for this, but I will say that there's sort of the inner world and the things that you choose to pay attention to, things that you choose to be preoccupied with. Those are the spaces which have not been taken over. And to different people, who is doing the taking over, who is the oppressor, if you like, is going to look different. It could be, kind of systemic power, the patriarchy. It could be somebody in your, you have a relationship with, somebody in your family. But whoever that might be, or whatever that might be, the one space that they have not conquered is what is within you, and what you choose to care about, and what you choose to pay attention to, and so it's very important. It's incredibly important that you cater to that space, and that you have ownership of that space. And it's by no means a space that isn't full of complex feelings. It's that inner world where joy resides, but also sorrow, suffering. But it's the space you own, and it's in some sense, this isn't just about you. I think that in this realization, maybe some snippet of how we also collectively start to listen to each other. Because when I see that, when I'm in contact with that internal space in me, I'm more readily able to see that space in another person and to communicate with them from that place. I hope that that made sense.
I'm glad that you did not have anything prepared that was so beautiful, and yeah, I feel a little freer.
Thank you.
We could have a whole other conversation about what it's been like to be a woman leading this project, and yeah, women in leadership is a whole other thing. Minna, thanks so much for the work that you do in the world, for wrestling with big questions and inviting us to wrestle too. And for everyone that's listening, you can look in the show notes and we'll have links to MsAfropolitan, to some of Minna's talks and some of Minna's writings outside of her book, and links to her book. So thanks again, Minna, for being here with us.
Thank you so much, Traci. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for being here and listening to this episode of the Sidewalk Talk podcast. If you like what you heard, tell your friends, tell your family, like and comment on the podcast publisher that you're listening from, and subscribe. This will help us get the word out about changing our culture to one of